on the killing of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Many people want to know what the United States will do, and since I'm sitting with you, what Canada will do. Canada has a $15 billion deal to sell light armored vehicles to Saudi Arabia. You said last month Canadians expect there to be consequences for Jamal Khashoggi's premeditated murder. Will Canada cancel its arms sales?
We've been working with the international community to try and get answers on the terrible murder of Khashoggi. This is something that the entire world is outraged about, and we are demanding answers on it. But I will point out that Canada has been in conflict with Saudi Arabia at a diplomatic level for a few months now, because we put out a statement condemning the arrest of a number of pro-democracy, pro-women activists in Saudi Arabia. We will continue to stand up firmly for human rights, while at the same time looking for ways to be more transparent and more accountable in the economic choices we make.
But is there a line, Mr. Prime Minister? What would it take for you to say that's it? I know it will cost Canada $1 billion because that's the penalty for you to cancel this arms agreement. But is there a line where you get information and you just say, no, we are not doing this deal anymore with Saudi Arabia? Is it on the table?
We are continuing to look at how to move forward responsibly, but the first thing is to get a level of accountability and responsibility for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and then we make determinations about the next steps.
So it may be on the table. It's an option?
You look forward to making the right decision based on the information you have at the time. We still expect more information on this.
Let me ask you about the global tilt to the right that we're seeing in some elections around the world, from the United States to Brazil to Italy and Hungary. Are you concerned at all that you and leaders of your ilk are becoming somewhat of an endangered species right now?
I think that there is a reality that a lot of people are anxious around their futures. There's a lot of anxiety for your own retirement, for your kids' futures, your kids' job. People don't know where that's going to come from in this disrupted world. And there are a lot of people out there with really easy sounding answers. What we've done here in Canada is set forward some more complex but very effective answers that do bring people together, that do things like give child benefits to families who can feel optimistic about their kids, invest in training programs so that people can be more successful in a new global economy. We have worked on not augmenting those fears, but allaying those fears, and it's working in Canada.
That's interesting, though. You say that this tilt to the right that we're seeing around the globe is easy answers, but not necessarily the right ones.
In many cases, yeah.
What keeps you up at night?
The polarization we see in Canada and around the world. People who don't listen to each other anymore. People who are so sure that they are right that they won't listen to anyone who disagrees, and will even dehumanize people who disagree with them. The demonization of political opponents is something that is fundamentally counter to the idea that diversity of opinions, of perspectives, of backgrounds should be a source of strength and resilience.
The free press. As you know, President Trump has repeatedly referred to the free press as the enemy of the American people. This happened even after a bomb was sent to my office at CNN. Is that dangerous?
I have been unequivocal repeatedly that a free press is fundamental to any democracy around the world, to any free society. You have to have an informed populace and politicians that are being held to account from media. That's why whether it's the killing of a journalist in the case of Khashoggi, in the Saudi consulate, or just standing up for the important work that journalists do, I will always be unequivocal about defending journalism, investing in free and independent journalism as a country, and that's something that I make no secret of and no bones about.
Let's talk about the election. You know, we have a big election in the United States.
I heard.
In the United States right now. It is Election Day in America. When you ran in 2015, Mr. Prime Minister, you said the leadership we need most is the leadership that brings people together. What do you make of the U.S. election right now?
I make that Americans will make the choice that they need to make, that they choose to make, and I will work with whichever Congress they elect, with whatever president they elect, whether it was 2 years ago or 2 years from now. My job is to stand up for Canada and to defend Canadian interests and to have a constructive working relationship with whoever is elected in the United States.
But to your point about the necessity of bringing people together, the closing argument we've seen from President Trump in the last few days, you've seen it, has been a closing argument of fear of immigrants. Look, during the travel ban, you tweeted, Canadians will welcome you regardless of your faith. Diversity is our strength. Welcome to Canada. What is your reaction to President Trump's closing message on immigration right now?
My job is to stand up for Canadian interests and have a constructive working relationship with whoever Americans choose to elect.
But as someone who has spoken up for the rights of immigrants, welcomed asylum seekers to this country, the president has talked about those in the caravan coming up from Central America as invaders. What do you call them?
We've had in Canada a number of democratic challenges right here in my home province of Quebec in the separatist movement. And one of the things that was really important that all Canadians on either side of the debate agreed on was it was important that people outside our borders not weigh in on our own decisions. And that's a principle that I learned here in Quebec that I will apply to respecting people's opportunities and choices to make their own choices.
You have called Canada a moose. That was your choice of animal, even-tempered and strong. So what's the United States right now? My
father gave a speech to a joint session of Congress back in the late 70s, where he likened Canada living by the United States to like a mouse sleeping next to an elephant. No matter how even-tempered the beast, you react to every twitch and grunt. I said, you know what? I don't think of us as a mouse. I think of us as a moose.
Okay.
Large, present, but still massively outweighed beside the elephant. We will continue to be attentive to what's going on in the United States, but stand securely in our own strength and our own approach.
The new trade deal replacing NAFTA, USMCA, is agreed upon but not signed yet. Are you considering, Mr. Prime Minister, not signing it unless President Trump lifts the tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum?
Obviously, the tariffs on steel and aluminum are a continued frustration. What a tariff is a way of hiking prices on your own domestic consumers. So consumers in the United States are paying more for Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum than they otherwise would. And we've brought in retaliatory tariffs. That means Canadian consumers are paying more for bourbon, for Heinz ketchup, for a broad range of things, because we had to retaliate. But we would much rather have genuine free trade with the United States. So we're going to continue to work as soon as we can to lift those tariffs. But we're not at the point of saying that we wouldn't sign if it wasn't lifted, although we're trying to make that case.
But Mr. Prime Minister, some see this as the moment of leverage before that potential signing date, potentially November 30th, right before there's a new Mexican government in power. That this is your moment for leverage. This is your moment where you could say, Mr. President, if you don't lift these steel and aluminum tariffs, we're not going to sign it. Any chance that happens?
One of the things that served me very, very well through the 13 months of negotiations over the new NAFTA was that I don't negotiate in public. And we have strong conversations in private and we get to the right outcome for everyone.
So when it comes to why the steel and aluminum tariffs were put in place, as you know, the argument made by some in the West Wing was for national security. You called that insulting and unacceptable. Have you talked to the president about that argument specifically? Has he apologized to you for Peter Navarro making those comments?
More than that, I had a conversation with the president at the G7 in Italy about a year and a half ago, where he agreed with me that it would be insulting to include Canada on a list of national security concerns on imported steel. I mean, our steel is in American armored vehicles, our aluminum is in your fighter jets. We have been close partners for a long time. That argument has been made time and time again. We're also now on an argument where these tariffs are actually hurting American businesses. American workers are losing their jobs because of these steel and aluminum tariffs. And we're going to continue to make arguments based on facts, not based on emotions or insults.
Okay. So to the point about tariffs, the president said in the Rose Garden when he announced this deal, quote, "Without tariffs, we would not be talking about a deal." Is he right? Did tariffs force Canada's hand here?
On the contrary, we have been open from the very beginning to negotiate a new and modernized NAFTA. I mean, it's one of those things that we recognize that a 25-year-old trade deal always has ways to update it for a digital economy, for modern expectations, and we were able to do an awful lot of that.
It's not the case that if there were no tariffs, you would not have.
We were always willing to sit down and negotiate, and we have.
On China, you have said, quote, "We're happy to engage with the Chinese." This is on trade. But part of USMCA lays out that any of the parties can back out, walk away from the deal with 6 months' notice if another one of the parties starts to negotiate with a non-market economy. Now, translate non-market economy, everyone knows that means China. Will that stop Canada from seeking a bilateral deal with China?
Nothing in the USMCA limits Canada's ability to negotiate trade deals with anyone. The USMCA, like the original NAFTA, has a 6-month clause. You don't even have to give a reason for it. You can announce that you want out of the trade deal at 6 months' notice, and you can walk away. That's already there. What the non-market economy clause requires is a level of transparency. If we're going to negotiate with China, or if the US is going to negotiate with China, they need to keep their partners apprised.
Let's talk about your relationship with the president. Earlier this year, you said international relations often do come down to interpersonal relationships. Is all of this fighting back and forth, is this all water under the bridge now between you and the president?
The friendship between Canada and the United States is far deeper than that between any given president or prime minister. I have a good, constructive working relationship with the president, which is what Canadians expect me to have. But the connections between Canada and the US run so deep and so broad that the relationship is going to be fine regardless of who's at the top.
One fascinating thing that you've spoken about is the greatest lesson you learned from your father, the former prime minister. And you said once that he taught you to trust people. Do you fully trust President Trump that he will uphold his promises and not back out of deals, as we saw with the G7 closing communique?
What my father taught me was to trust Canadians. It was a way of looking at the electorate as saying, you don't have to dumb it down for them. You don't have to scare them into this or that. You can actually treat people like intelligent, rational actors, and they will rise to the occasion. And that has been my approach in campaigning, in politics, from the very beginning.
So, President Trump is not a Canadian.
Yeah, I
Do you
recognize
trust President
that
Trump on these issues?
every leader has a job of sticking up for their own country, and they will do it in their own ways. And I respect the fact that that people have different approaches to it. My approach is to trust Canadians and deal in a way that is direct with other leaders.
President Trump has at times spoken more critically of you, Mr. Prime Minister, than he has of President Putin of Russia, Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, whom he recently called terrific, a talented negotiator, and said we fell in love. What do you think of that?
My job as a politician is to focus on what matters to Canadians.
You don't
and
take
that's
it personally.
What I do. You know, in politics, you get called a lot of things by a lot of different people, and most of the time, you're just able to shrug it off, and I've gotten pretty good at that. My focus is on how to build a constructive relationship that's going to work for Canadians, and that's what I'll always do.